I wasn't as strong of a freestyler, so I got put in the backstroke a lot. I guess I was a good floater. I don't know, but yeah, no. And then so swim team, and then I started working the gate at the swim club when I turned 15, and then began lifeguarding, and absolutely loved it. So
yeah, that's exactly what my son is doing. He did the gate last year, and now he's doing lifeguarding. So he's working his way up in the world, and he's got earned income, which allows him to make a contribution to a Roth IRA, which we started to do. So planning can start very, very young. Welcome back to Amplified Wealth According to Plan, along with my co-host, Kate Fishbein. My name is Tom Farrell. And we have a very special episode today, Kate.
I'm excited. Yeah, we've got a very important topic, a VIT, and we have a VIP, a very important professional with us today. We have our own Amy Pastorino with us today. Amy, welcome. Amy has an incredible, 20 years of investment management experience, and we are just so thrilled to have her here today. She holds the CFP designation. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to talk about our topic today. I feel like there's a lot to cover, and we get the questions so many times from our clients about Roths, what to do, and sometimes, why haven't I done this yet? So looking forward to digging in.
Yeah, it's a topic that comes up a lot. I think it's almost like assumed like, we'll just do Roth conversions, right? So I'm really excited to kind of drill down on this topic with you today.
And Kate, this is how many episodes we've been on the Roth IRA topic now? This is our third, I think.
This is our third in our Roth series that we've done, Tom. So,
all right. So I think that just, that highlights.
We're digging down deep.
That highlights the complexities here and the opportunities that folks have to figure out how a Roth IRA fits into their overall financial plan.
Yeah, and there's definitely been more focus, I think, lately on Roth IRAs in general. So I think it's timely. And we've also had, I'd wish you a happy summer, but it really hasn't felt like summer because it's been so busy. There's been a lot of changes. And in particular, one of the big changes that has recently occurred, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, aka ABBA, not like the band, but ABBA, OBBBA, recently passed. And with that, it brought a few changes. But one of the big ones is, these kind of carrying over these lower tax rates as well. And there have been some changes in that arena. So we thought that discussing Roth conversions would be a good topic because, of this extension of kind of this lower tax rate coming through for a lot of individuals.
Absolutely. So let's get started and do a quick refresher of traditional IRAs versus Roth IRAs. So the key difference is most people have traditional IRAs, same taxation as 401ks and 403bs. And pretty much the income grows tax deferred. Taxes are paid when you take the money out in retirement upon distribution. So you put your money in, you get tax deferred growth, and then you pay taxes when you receive the money. Roth IRAs work a little bit different. They're after tax contributions. No taxes are paid on distribution. So depending on when you're taking the money out in Roth, you might have a really long runway to continue to build that wealth and have flexibility of having tax-free distributions when you take it out.
Right, and they're not always tax-free. You kind of have to watch out. And we did do one of our Roth pods is on, the taxation of Roth IRAs. So you do have to, be wary there. So, I guess we should insert link below on that episode as well. And then on the traditional IRA, most of the time, you get that tax deduction, but not all the time, right? But that's, that's a great point and a great refresher, I think, for individuals, because the taxation a lot of times is, what really differentiates these two types of accounts. While the assets are in those accounts, they grow tax deferred, but there's a lot of other variables.
Yes, and I would say definitely read the fine print. So Kate and Tom had a whole series on different rules within the Roth IRA. So I'd highly recommend that you tune in and listen more if you think this applies to you. So a lot of times I get questions from clients of, let's do a Roth conversion. And I want to get to the why before we actually implement an action plan for them.
Right.
And there's two key answers: tax flexibility and legacy. So conversion for you, for your goals. If you think there's a chance of higher appreciation, or potentially you don't know what tax bracket you are going to be in and you want diversification, convert for tax flexibility. For your heirs, if you want your heirs to inherit an IRA that has tax-free distributions, the legacy reason is for you. And for many of our clients, they might have both of these as a reason why they would consider conversions.
Right. And that's a great point. So I always use this really crummy analogy. Making sure that, you meet your own goals essentially before helping others, but obviously everyone has different goals and you need to consider all of that. But yeah, making sure that this might fit into your overall plan based on those goals is always a great kind of check up there, right?
Yeah. One of the nice things about this philosophy is your reason why could change over time. So you might decide that you want to have tax flexibility for you and your spouse. And then over time, you realize that maybe the goals are not the same, or maybe the appreciation was higher than expected. And then it could flip over to legacy. So that flexibility is really nice.
Yeah. And part of the reason, too, why that legacy is so attractive now is, the changes that were made in the Secure Act, right? Which, really the new inherited IRA rules for non-spouse beneficiaries significantly accelerate the distribution of, pre-tax inherited IRA money to the beneficiaries. So you're looking at, what had been, you used to get that stretch IRA, right? But now it's that 10-year period. We're not, where an inherited IRA beneficiary that's non-spouse has to not only take a required minimum distribution each year, but also deplete those inherited IRA assets within 10 years. And as mentioned earlier, anything that comes out of that inherited IRA, if it's pre-tax dollars, is coming out as ordinary income to the beneficiary. So it's could push them into a higher bracket as well.
Yeah, I think the Secure Act and the impact that it's having on the way that these types of retirement accounts are viewed, I think it's forcing investors to think about what, Amy, you were just describing, which is, the way I think about this slide is, tax flexibility versus legacy. That's, whenever we're talking to clients about planning, you typically do that in these time elements, right? What are your short-term, intermediate-term goals, right? And then what are your longer-term goals? And each one of those buckets needs to be thought about and evaluated. And certainly the tax flexibility speaks to me in terms of, thinking about your short, intermediate term goals. Where are the tax rates now? What are they going to be in a couple of years for me? What's my distribution plan look like when I switch from earned income to living off of my portfolio? And then, Kate, to your point about the legacy planning and the Secure Act, it's a different game now, right?
Yeah.
If you inherit an account like this from, let's say, your parents, it's really no longer considered a retirement account. This is an inherited asset. It was your parents' retirement account, but now you need to deal with the distribution rules that are, condensed compared to what it used to be before they passed, these new rules.
And a lot of people are surprised by that, seeing that your taxable income could go up substantially, if you happen to inherit an inherited IRA, let's say this year. Over the course of the next 10 years, you do need to liquidate it. And I think a lot of people are still surprised by that rule.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about tax location. And this is really about thinking about your personal assets and where are they located for tax diversification. So there's 3 different buckets: tax now, tax later, and tax never. So tax now is going to be your typical taxable investment account. It could be a joint account, it could be a brokerage account, and you pay the taxes in the year that they're incurred, regardless of whether you need the money or not. Then we move on to tax later. These are going to be the classic traditional IRAs, your 401ks, for some people 403bs. The money grows tax deferred that you do need to pay the tax when distributions happen. So for most people, that'll be in retirement. If you're inheriting the account, it would be over the course of the 10-year rule that we talked about as well. And then we get into tax never. Those are the Roth IRA accounts. They're already taxed. So when you take the money out for whether you inherit it or if it's during your retirement or for your goals, there are no taxes on that. So it's really about finding the balance that works for you, your goals, and your family between these three different buckets.
Yeah, and this really goes to like the tax flexibility comment earlier, right, Amy? That, maybe not having all eggs in one basket and really having kind of a diversification among these assets or tax buckets, if you will.
Oh, absolutely. As financial planners, we always talk about the investment mix or the investment blend. Are you diversified? And I would say we should definitely be diversified as well from your tax position and tax location, of making sure you have that flexibility and that balance.
Amy, I love the way that you put these into buckets. I think the tax now, tax later, tax never. I think that's an easy concept for people to understand. And that middle one, tax later. I think a lot of folks that are still in their working years, the pundits out there, a lot of the research and the articles really point people towards this middle bucket, tax later. You contribute to your IRA or your 401k, right? These are the years where, people are really loading up 401ks, making sure that if they can max them out, they max them out, right? All you hear is max out your 401k and whatnot. And traditionally that's been on a pre-tax basis, which means that you get that deduction up front, which means you're loading up the tax later bucket, right? And I think that could be great as long as, every year you're kind of picking your head up a little bit here and you're taking a look at the big picture and saying, okay, great. How much am I building up my tax later bucket, and what am I doing to potentially take advantage of tax now or tax never?
Absolutely. Yep. And I think a lot of people have, really been encouraged through, an employer match or the contributions that they're eligible to contribute through their employer plan. And some people do not even realize that they might be eligible to participate in a Roth 401k. That's also an option as well for some individuals that are still actively contributing.
Yeah, and next year through the Secure 2.0, there are going to be some changes in terms of those catch-up contributions for individuals that are making $145,000 or more in the prior year, where those contributions, it appear, will have to go into, a Roth 401k. So it does appear that, again, as mentioned earlier, it's like there's almost like a little bit more focus, on Roth IRAs, certainly with some of the new tax changes that have come through as well. So kind of creating some of that tax diversification in a way, but, getting, obviously it's a Roth 401k contribution, so you're not going to get that wonderful tax deduction in that year. So it is kind of hard to give that up, right? It means more taxable income, but it does also mean some more tax diversification later on as well.
Yeah, and I think it's defining what's most important to you today. So for some people, maybe they have really filled up that tax later bucket, right? Where other individuals, we've seen it occasionally where people have a really high concentration of Roth IRAs already. So it really comes down to, what you're trying to define for you, your goals and your family. So let's get into a tax diversification example.
Great. And who is this individual? Let's give this individual a name. We'll call her Agnes. Agnes sure. After tax.
Yeah, let's call her Agnes after tax.
Okay.
So Agnes after tax has accumulated $1.1 million in her traditional IRA. She has about $22,000 in her Roth IRA. In the past, she's been limited as to how much she can add to her Roth IRA, but she's had this account for some time. And she also has $400,000 in her brokerage. So when we look at Agnes's total wealth, she has $1.1 million, 72% in tax later money. So we know that when Agnes retires, she's going to have a tax bill of, whatever she needs in the year that she needs before she, is able to spend that. We also know that Agnes wants to learn more about adding to her Roth IRA. So we're going to talk about an action plan for her and what she can accomplish over time with us.
Yeah. And one thing to bring up too, right? So let's go back to that, let's say you're contributing to pre-tax funds, right, throughout your working years, right? And then you reach RMD age and you have to start taking required minimum distributions. Let's talk about, just that income, right? That's coming out as income, right? When you take that distribution from an IRA and what that might impact, right? So any distribution from an IRA, again, tax is ordinary income. So that could impact things like your IRMA surcharge, right? That could affect things like the taxation of your Social Security benefits, and potentially other deductions that you might, receive. So the larger that IRA account grows to be, the larger those required minimum distributions could potentially be in the future, causing potentially more taxable income coming out, which could cause a bigger tax bill and impact those different costs as mentioned. So just to insert that, right, as a possibility.
Yeah, and in this example, Agnes certainly has the overwhelming majority of her investment savings in that tax later bucket. So planning on that distribution tax effect would be extremely important for her.
And I think it's important to think about, the individual's age and also their time horizon of when they need the money, right? So with Agnes, let's say she's 50, right? So she still has a couple years before she's going to retire. And she still has a bit of a longer runway until she's going to take required minimum distributions. So if she were to do nothing today, what do we think that $1.1 million is going to look like, 25 years down the road? So there is a lot to consider, because it's not just where are you today, but directionally, where are you going? Where is that retirement income coming from before RMD age? And how does that affect, Kate, to your point, all of the other pieces of your tax picture? So it's a lot to consider.
Yeah, and that's a great point, right? Is that trajectory. It's not just the here and now, it's the what am I going to look like, come retirement age or whatnot.
Yeah. So in this example, we met with Agnes and we said, let's come up with a plan. And her action plan was over the next 10 years, she's going to convert $50,000 from her traditional IRA to her Roth IRA. And she's going to do it on an annual basis for 10 years. And what we said is, what is the impact that we can have on her tax diversification by trying this strategy? So on the left-hand side, you'll see that was her original portfolio, about 1.1 million in the IRA, 22,000 in her Roth IRA, and 400,000 in her brokerage account. She went forward with the plan, 50,000 conversion for 10 years. And as a result, she now has about 1.27 million in her IRA, 737,000 in her Roth IRA, and 571,000 in her brokerage account. So you can look at the difference that she made over the course of 10 years, slow and steady. Of course, as we know, when you convert to a Roth IRA, you have to pay the taxes. So common questions I get are, what happens with the taxes? It has to come, best efficiency would be from a cash account or a brokerage account, right? So Agnes did have to pay taxes on 50,000 of income along the way, but look at the results. She now has flexibility for if she wanted to, let's say, take 50,000 out for a home improvement, she could do so from the Roth IRA or from the brokerage or from her traditional IRA. It's really her choice. She's also really set up her legacy nicely where it's a bit more balanced, having 22% in Roth and 29% in that brokerage account. But everyone's puzzle is going to look a little bit different based upon your short, intermediate, and long-term goals.
Yeah, and that's impressive. So she went from 72% in the traditional IRA down to 49%. So, really, really did chip away at those pre-tax funds. And I think one thing to note too, right? So it's almost like when you look at traditional funds, right? We say, let's say there was, $100,000 in a traditional IRA, and you're in the 30% combined tax bracket, let's say 22% federal, 8% for state. On an after-tax basis, that's kind of like the same thing as 70,000 in a Roth IRA. So, Roth IRA money on an after-tax basis is very valuable when you're just looking at the dollars, because when you look at those pre-tax IRA funds, it's easy to forget, like, oh, right, that's the pre-tax amount. That money is coming out and it's going to be taxed, and after tax, it's going to be less than that IRA, market value as it stands now.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. And we see that all the time of clients saying, I have $1 million in my account and it's $1 million in the market value. But depending on where you live, there's going to be federal tax and potentially state tax rate applied to that. So it's definitely important to review the taxation and the tax location. I think something else that's really important to emphasize is when we think of Agnes, she didn't start out with 1.1 million in her IRA. That was slow and steady savings. So she built that over many years of, work and hard savings and some employer matches as well within her 401k that one day became an IRA. And I think that's important to consider when doing a Roth conversion. Many times it's going to be a slow and steady strategy, similar to how the wealth was built. For a lot of times I get questions about, should I do a larger conversion? Should I convert the whole amount? And for many individuals, that might not be the answer. It might be defining a slow and steady strategy that works, within the tax picture, and then also with the longer term outcome. And I think yeah,
that's a great point, because I think everyone gets so excited, like, oh, well, let's do this now. Let's do this tomorrow. But again, it's going to be taxed as ordinary income whenever you take out. So doing that whole big chunk at once could be very punishing and really push you into those higher brackets. And then you're paying, more tax maybe than if you were to take that slow and steady approach where, you're filling up brackets. So that's an excellent point, Amy.
Yeah, I like thinking about this as a process, as Amy was describing. It's an opportunity for IRA owners to make a decision every year. Every year they get to make a fresh decision. Does this still make sense for me, given my goals and objectives? What does the tax picture look like for my situation? And what am I trying to accomplish here? How much I'm going to do this year? And in this example, it's happening over 10 years, which I do think, as people think about the opportunity to convert to a Roth, and you think about this window, right? This classic window of I've retired, right? So I'm no longer at the higher tax bracket that I've been used to while I was, working and having all that earned income, to when the government says my required minimum distributions start, right? There's this window of time where you may be in a much lower bracket, which does, I think, open up the gates here in terms of establishing a process in order to start making these conversions from IRA to Roth IRA and doing so over time. And this is, this visual for folks that are watching on YouTube. We have a much better balanced, number of accounts here for Agnes, where she went from 2% in Roth IRA to 22%. Again, it took a 10-year period here, but I think that highlights the process that we're talking about.
But that was a great point, Tom. Kind of like that golden period, right, when someone retires up until RMD age. But when might someone consider doing a conversion? When might it be appropriate? Let's talk about that.
So, Tom, you were just talking about, potentially years of lower effective tax rates. So you mentioned, post-retirement, pre-taking money out for required minimum distributions, but there could be other years, potentially for people who have uneven income, right? Potentially with years of higher income versus lower income. Those lower income years are really great opportunities to start converting to Roth IRA, or maybe adding to the Roth IRA that was already started. Also, at times during market downturns, right? So if the portfolio, let's say Agnes's portfolio of 1.1 million went down to 800,000, that certainly would be a substantial market swing. But depending on what she was looking to convert, it's based upon the dollar amount. So during times of market volatility or downturn, there is sometimes a greater appetite for some of our clients to move forward with Roth conversions.
Right. So if Agnes had some low cost stock in her traditional IRA account and really didn't want to give it up, but the market comes down, that might be an opportunity to maybe transfer some of those low cost stock positions into her Roth IRA. So you're taxed on, the market value as of the transfer that day, right? When you do the conversion. And that you're essentially haven't given up that equity position. The equity has just gone from the IRA into the Roth IRA, and then maybe you can continue that growth of those, hopefully, high growth assets in the Roth IRA, and get that, tax-free growth over time.
Yeah, that's a great point. And certainly, while we never want to time the market, all of our strategies here that we're talking about are really over the long term. So in the example of Agnes, we were talking about over the next decade. So when you're thinking about the underlying holdings, we're not going to make, bets based upon the next quarter or the next year. But if your client is holding a asset that they feel really strongly it has the potential for appreciation over a long period of time, lock in the taxes today and take care of that today. That way, any of that appreciation would be tax-free. So each of these are very unique and based upon your own tax situation, but there's a lot that you can do based upon these three tiles here.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point too, right? You're not doing a Roth conversion for, next year, right? Mm-hmm. These are long-term strategies. And ideally, you're getting that long-term growth over time because that's really where it becomes meaningful for individuals. And also there's that, 5-year holding period for Roth IRAs if you're, in general, that Roth IRA account has to be open for 5 years. And then you've got that Roth conversion 5-year holding period if you're under 59 and a half. So really, again, watching those tax rules, and making sure that, this is part of the long-term strategy.
And Kate, I think we may have done an episode on those rules. So if anybody wants to refresh themselves on what to pay attention to, check out our episode on taxation of distributions.
Yep, exactly.
Absolutely. But this highlights the tax choice element here, and building a diversified portfolio with different tax characteristics given your objectives.
So I feel like we've highlighted a lot of the good, reasons why someone might do a conversion, right? But why might someone consider waiting? Let's talk about that and kind of review, why this might not work for some individuals.
Sure. And, I think one of the challenges is, sometimes you have your heart set on a strategy and it might not work for you during this tax year. The first thing that I highly recommend is making sure you have enough cash on hand, right? So doing a Roth conversion will increase your taxes and you will need to pay the tax liability. So if you don't have an adequate emergency reserve, right? If your cash position is a little bit lower than what works for your personal financial goals, that would make me pause and say, it might not be the year. Let's continue to build the cash reserve. That way, when you get your tax liability bill, you're able to pay the conversion dollar amount.
Right, because ideally you're not paying that tax bill from the IRA. Ideally, you're paying that tax bill from another brokerage account or, assets away from the traditional IRA.
Exactly. That's a common misunderstanding. A lot of people think that they can take an additional distribution to pay the taxes. But, in most examples, we would say it works best to use cash to pay for the conversion. So just building upon effective tax rate, if you're selling real estate with substantial gains during this calendar year, you really need to get down to the numbers to see if a Roth conversion still makes sense. It's going to come down to your numbers of, what are your gains? What does the total tax position look like? And are you willing to pay the taxes for this year? So that second tile, I would say, is definitely review with your CPA and strategize. Does this still make sense? And if it does, what is that dollar amount?
Yeah. That's a great point because think about it, right? Like in retirement, you just retire. A lot of times people are downsizing, right? Selling their primary home. They've got maybe big gains. We also have a Section 121 episode to listen to in terms of capital gains. But, I would say making sure that, all right, did we downsize this year? We sold our primary home. Like, is this not the year to do it? Because, we're making other transactions in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of our topics here, relocation to another state. Every state has the tax nuances that are a little bit different, not just taxable income, but how and when they tax retirement accounts. So I think it's really important to be informed of, what is your game plan over the next few years? It's very common, Kate, as you mentioned, for clients to consider downsizing or moving after they retire. Yeah. And as we all know, that doesn't happen the day you retire, right? So just looking ahead and figuring out, are there any opportunities that we'll have in the future versus today? And what does that mean when you get down to the tax calculation?
Yeah, and that's something, okay, I was just going to say, to Amy's point there is, the nuanced rules from state to state, right? A lot of folks are thinking about the states that have no income tax, right? That's something that people gravitate towards, which is understandable. But there's many states that have carve outs and exemptions for distributions from retirement accounts and pension income and things like that. So, this would be an exercise in a scenario analysis. If I did a Roth conversion in my current state, right, given my current state's rules, here's what the tax impact would be. If I moved to XYZ state and I made the same level of Roth conversion, this would be the tax impact if I did that. And perhaps it's more advantageous to wait until you did relocate in that example.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there can be it's a lot to know, right? You got to know, so really reviewing it with your CPA and making sure that everything is as it should be, for sure.
Agreed. It's very personal based upon your goals, your taxation, and also what you're trying to achieve for you and your family. And I think everyone is going to have a different outcome when they go through this exercise. I think also looking through, future years, it's very hard to predict, what the future tax code is going to look like, but you have a general sense as to, is this year going to be the same, substantially more or less with regards to tax bracket and where you are in your effective tax rate. So I think that's important to consider, of just thinking ahead of what could potentially change and how would that impact the Roth conversion. And a lot of times that's not a yes or no discussion. It's more dollar amounts and what makes the most sense. And getting back to, as you both discussed, of really just sitting down and crunching the numbers to figure out where you are today versus where you would be in the next few years and finding a blend that works. And lastly, one of the things that we didn't talk about yet is future years with larger deductions. So as we all know, there's been a lot of tax changes, and the higher standard deduction is here to stay. So what that means is there could be potential years where maybe you're taking the standard deduction or you're taking a different type of deduction versus, in future years where you might be able to take advantage of, let's say, higher charitable deductions on Schedule A versus, the new provision for charitable deductions, right? Or maybe potentially you might be able to deduct your state and local taxes, right? So putting that all together is going to be a really important piece of that puzzle to make that decision, because that could also impact the dollar amount of conversion that you're looking to do.
Yeah, that's a great point. And recently with, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, there have been a lot of changes. So really, digging into that, with your CPA and reviewing, hey, this year versus next year, when might this make sense, if it does make sense at all. All right. So let's dig a little further here. So for contribution eligibility, right, why would, should someone just contribute to a Roth IRA, versus a Roth conversion?
Yeah. And I think it's, something to consider as well. We were talking about, working versus being in retirement, but there are times where people slowly, gradually start kind of a hybrid pre-retirement, right? So there could be still some earned income that might be below some thresholds where you can actually contribute some of your savings to a Roth IRA. So definitely something to consider. Everyone's situation is different. If you have an earned income and if it's below the thresholds, maybe that's an option for you.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And that's, it's hard to get money into a Roth IRA, right? As we've discussed, right? So I think 150 Magi for single and 236 for married filing jointly to be, incomes that have to be under that amount to be able to contribute to a Roth IRA. So it is hard to get money into a Roth IRA if you're a high earner. But I want to note that to do a Roth conversion, there aren't any income caps, right? So not only are there any income caps, there's also no cap on how much you can convert, but knowing that whatever you do convert comes out taxed as ordinary income.
Right. The IRS doesn't mind if you're willing to pay the highest possible tax bracket on a conversion. Right. There are no limits there.
That's pretty high. They need all the help they can get right now. So yeah, for sure. And again, if you were to make a Roth IRA contribution, that's capped at $7,000 for the year 2025. If you're over 50, you can do the $1,000 catch up. So you're really limited, even if you are doing a Roth IRA contribution, in terms of the amount that you can get into a Roth. So just to highlight that.
Yeah, and that brings us to the backdoor of Roth, right? So as Kate mentioned, you can contribute $7,000 to a traditional IRA or an additional $1,000 catch up, so $8,000 into a traditional IRA. If you don't receive a benefit, meaning you're unable to deduct the IRA on your tax return, You can then do a backdoor Roth where you move it over to a Roth IRA and potentially get a little bit of help on that tax situation. But I would caution you that there's more to the details than just the transfer. If you have other IRA money, it could potentially be taxed at a proportion, so more favorable than doing 100% conversion, but definitely speak to your CPA about that.
Yep, and that's that pro rata rule. And Tom, do you want to do it this time?
I think we chatted about that in a previous episode, but the backdoor to us kind of just highlights some of the hoops that we're allowed to jump through to get dollars into a Roth IRA. Right, we're talking about essentially two main avenues: contributions versus conversions. And technically, a backdoor Roth contribution is both. It's a contribution to an IRA without the deduction, and then a conversion to a Roth IRA. Again, limited to that $7,000 per year. So this would be, on the slow and steady type of a pathway of funding a Roth over time. And then from a conversion standpoint, like we've been talking about, that's where opportunistically you can do larger chunks should it make sense for your personal tax situation.
Great. And we also kind of bring up this, cash on hand point here as well, where we're reviewing, right, Amy? And this goes back to that thinking that, instead of taking a distribution from the IRA to pay the tax bill, that you really want to make sure that you have the taxes away from the IRA to pay for that conversion. So making sure that you have that cash on hand. And again, that, if we're taking from that brokerage account and to pay the tax bill, and you're also considering, hey, I'm going to use that brokerage account to support my living expenses early in my retirement before RMDs kick in, or maybe before Social Security kicks in. Really kind of making those projections and making sure that, that those cash assets are around for your other needs as well.
Yeah, that's a really important part, Kate. The competing goals, you might have the cash on hand, but maybe you have it earmarked for something else. And similar to all financial planning, it's really about prioritizing what's most important to you this year. So if the Roth conversion is one of those top priorities and you have the cash, that's great. If you have it earmarked for something else, it's really more of a conversation about revisiting your goals and prioritizing what the cash is going to be used for.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then there are those withdrawal rules. There's always rules, we got to always rules just to complicate things. But essentially, a qualified distribution from a Roth IRA, you've got to be 59 and a half or older and have held the account for 5 years. And then if you're under 59 and a half, you need to watch out for that second 5-year rule, right? Which is that each conversion has its own separate time clock running, and each conversion, if you're under 59 and a half, has to be held for 5 years to avoid additional penalties.
And we had a lot of conversations around taxes, but let's break it down and talk about the different types of taxes that you should pay attention to during this analysis. So consider federal, state. We haven't really talked too much about estate tax, but that's going to be really important as well of, directionally, where's your estate going? And then inheritance taxes, depending on where you are, there could be state estate taxes or state inheritance taxes. So definitely review that of where you are today and potentially where you may be living in the future.
Great point. And then, of course, review it with the CPA, look at your whole picture, right? Consult your tax preparer and advisor for additional variables that might impact your particular situation.
I think there's a sense during this discussion that we do want our listeners to consult a tax professional when they're thinking about a Roth conversion. We can't stress that enough. When it comes to taxes, the last thing anybody wants is a surprise.
I don't even like surprises on my birthday. Nonetheless,
Exactly. And when you think about a tax surprise, it's usually the wrong kind of surprise. Exactly. So before you make an irrevocable decision to convert assets, because there's no longer any redos, they got rid of that rule. So when you do this, it's irrevocable and you got to live with the tax consequence. So it really is important that you do your homework up front, consult with the tax advisor so that you're clear on what this decision means for you moving forward.
That's right. No more recharacterization. No more, oops, I changed my mind.
Exactly. That was one of the greatest benefits that they provided when it came to Roth conversions. And I'm surprised. I guess I'm surprised it lasted as long as it did. But yeah, no longer.
Well, I think this is so great. Why don't we give our listeners some final, bullet points, some key considerations for, how to think about Roth conversions and how and when they might proceed.
Sure. Well, as you heard throughout our conversation today, Roth conversion is not an all or nothing strategy. It's really going to be personal. And in most cases, it's going to be slow and steady the way you build your retirement accounts. Keep in mind, tax laws can change. I would highly recommend revisiting this on an annual basis, even if you really have a set strategy in mind. This is based upon what we know today. And as we know, life changes. It may not be suitable if assets are intended for charity. One of the topics that we really didn't dig deep into today was that charity, would not need to pay taxes on the distribution. So this is really about your own personal goals and also your goals for legacy. If charity is part of the mix, we highly recommend you work with a financial planner and your tax professional.
That's a great point. Sorry, but that's a great point. Because, right, so if an individual is leaving their IRA to a charity, then that legacy piece, if they're not going to pay taxes, the charity's not going to pay taxes on that IRA, being inherited, then, why would you pay the tax bill? Because then if the charity was to get a Roth IRA, they're essentially giving up that tax piece that you paid. So that's a really good point.
Absolutely. And it may not be suitable if assets are already earmarked for other goals. So we talked about, even if you have a high cash position, but you have other competing goals that are more important than your Roth strategy, definitely keep that in mind. As we mentioned, this is probably going to be a long-term strategy. So some years it might not work out for a Roth conversion, but if you have a strategy over the long term, as we saw with Agnes, you could see what you're able to accomplish for your tax diversification.
Well, this has been great, Amy. There's so many points and variables to consider. So I so appreciate your spending time and helping our listeners to think through these different points and potential strategies. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Amy. Really appreciate it.
Kate and Tom, it was a pleasure. Hope to do this again soon. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks so much. And thanks to our listeners. Again, we're Amplified Wealth according to plan. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you back here soon. Thanks so much.
Happy summer.